Thank you very much, Fawn. It's lovely to be here. Yeah, I'm Tom Mustill. I'm a wildlife film and sort of science filmmaker, and I'm particularly interested in what we're talking about today, which is how we communicate the climate and nature crises. I have a podcast about that with Lucy Siegel called So Hot Right Now. But enough about me. Welcome. It is Earth Day Eve, as no one calls it, the day before Earth Day. And we have some fantastic speakers today. We've got so many of them that I'm going to have to be really rude and make them speak in very brief, small little nuggets, but are a diverse array of humans, I wrote in my notes, from the many niches of the natural history film ecosystem. So I'd like to ask each guest to introduce themselves in a sort of sentence, explain what their job is, and to answer a question. You have been given the power to understand the communications of other animals. Which animal do you invite to dinner, and why do you think they'd be a great guest? So I'm going to start with Faith.
All right, I'll go first. My name is Faith Musambi. I'm a producer director based in Kenya. And if I could sit down for dinner with any animal, I think I'd have to say the camel. I saw a camel today, and he just looked like he was so tired. He had the weight of the world on his shoulders. So I think I'd have him to dinner so we can hang out and I can find out why he looks that way.
Fantastic. Next, Freddie.
Hi, everyone. I'm a producer director. I work in the BBC Natural History unit. So I've worked recently on the series 7 Worlds, 1 Planet, and on Planet Earth 2 before that. I'm working on Planet Earth 3 now. I think if I was to have a guest, a special guest at a dinner party, it would have to be the Humpback Whale. We've got to know what they're singing about. It's that's the big question out there, I think. So that would be my answer.
Amazing. And Sharik.
Hey, I am the founder and director of a company called Impact Wild, a young company called Impact Wild. We're an impact production company that specifically focuses on benefiting wildlife and wild places. I myself is from sort of a wildlife and human observational documentary world in Bristol. Yeah, Tom, I mean, I had a whole selection of animals planned, but if I have to choose one of the ones that I have, it would be, let's go for an earthworm, to be honest. I'd love to know what goes on below the soil, and I'm sure they have a lot to say to us as well.
I mean, they are multi-generational burrowing hermaphrodites, so I think they'd probably have quite a lot to tell us.
I'm sure.
Tom, yeah, other Tom Coveney.
Other Tom. Hello, I'm Tom Coveney. I'm a commissioning editor for science and natural history programs at the BBC. My daughter has just finished a school project about dolphins, so that's who I'm going to invite. She was very excited to tell me that they never chew their food. So if I have a dolphin at dinner, at least I definitely won't have the worst table manners.
These answers are fantastic. They're so much better than what I was going to say if anyone else. Lisa.
We're so like-minded. I really did honestly have the Humpback Whale as the top of my list, and specifically so that I could ask it to translate its songs so that we could understand what the hell they're talking about. So that's just so funny that we were like the same thing there. And I also thought about an earthworm because of the importance of soil and how great it would be to understand, you know, why an earthworm does what it does. But I guess I would have to say, and I haven't even introduced myself yet, so I'm going to tie the two together. I would have to say a tardigrade, because I work for Water Bear and I'm the head of impact. And Water Bear got its name because the tardigrades, which are these tiny little microscopic animals that live in moss. They're actually also known as moss piglets, which I think is a super cute name. They are one of the most resilient animals on the planet. They can even live in space. And I think it would be super cool to talk to them and find out how they can put up with such extreme harsh conditions and still carry on regardless. They can even like fall asleep and nearly die for many years and then come back to life again. So it would be great to have them at a dinner party for sure.
I mean, I'm a vegetarian, but I think it's dangerous inviting something called a moss piglet to a dinner party because it sounds absolutely delicious. And Wendy.
Well, thanks, Tom. Hi, everybody. Yeah, I used to be previously the head of the Natural History Unit, 2012, 2016. That's almost 5 years ago. I set up True to Nature, based in Bristol, independent production company, where I was the CEO and founder, and gone on to exec produce lots of shows over those 5 years. I think I'll be joining you, Tom, because my animal was a dolphin. As the scientists have said, they're both not just they've identified words, but sentences. And anyone who knows me, I like to chat. So I thought that would be great dinner table or underwater company. They're very sociable. And most of all, I spent 3 years studying the Great Barrier Reef. It's my passion, my love. And dolphins live on reefs. And I would love to get their view on what they're seeing and what we might more do to help protect them.
Thank you very much. And I also need to mention Trisha Duffy from Albert. That is Trisha. Trisha, you self-describe as the meerkat of Albert. Is that right?
Yes, I'll be taking all your questions. So I would really love to invite everybody to add your comments in the chat as you respond to what everyone is saying. And also, please feel free to tell us who you would like to invite from the animal world to your dinner party. Add any questions, please put them in the Q&A, and I will be trying to do my best to moderate those questions and get as many of them as I possibly can answered by the panelists as we go through. It's great to be here.
I'm sorry, no, you don't get away with that easily. Oh. What animal would you invite to dinner and why?
Well, 100% it has to be a giraffe, because I'm completely obsessed with how amazing they are and the fact that they see the world from, from the sky looking down on all of us. So yeah, giraffe. When you posed the question, I knew exactly where I was. Not a meerkat.
And a 2.5 foot long tongue, which isn't bad, is it? That's but probably maybe potentially rude for the other diners.
Yeah.
So Albert, I don't know how much the audience knows about Albert, so just to quickly talk about that. There are a lot of resources in the chat that Albert have posted, kindly links to their planet placement examples, links to their production handbook, which is to do with calculating your carbon footprint, Albert training, which is also to do with that. But we're here today to talk less about how to reduce our impact as filmmakers in terms of the sustainability and carbon footprint, and more to do about what Albert calls its brain print, how our films shape the thoughts of the people who watch them. We already know, what do we know already? We know we need to limit our global heating to 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. The latest suggestions are we're not on track to do that. We also know that in order to thrive and be healthy, we need intact, diverse, and lots of ecosystems, and we also are not on track for that. And we also know we're very lucky as wildlife filmmakers to get to see these problems and the wonders of the world firsthand. And so, but what about the challenges? And how do we balance the needs and wants of audiences? And how do we decide what they want? So, just a couple of things to chat about today. Just a couple of pretty light things. So we're going to start off with a quick poll. Do you care about the natural world and the problems it faces? So I'd like you to all take part in this poll. If there's an exclamation mark for yes, you can add one for no if you don't as well.
I'm very sad panelists can't vote.
I know. I was just clicking at it, but no, we're not allowed opinions. So yes, 100% of our audience members say they care about the natural world and the problems it faces. So the point of that ridiculous poll is to point out that we are all on the same team. We share a concern about these animals and these ecosystems, and we share a concern about trying to transmit the problems they face. So I'd like to ask each of the panelists again a question, and that is, why did you agree to join this panel? And if you have something to share, what you'd like to contribute to the problem that we face in communicating the dangers to nature and climate yeah, so why you joined this panel and what you're hoping to do in your role about the problem that we face. And I'd like to start off with Wendy.
Thanks, Tom. My passion is the natural world. It's why I'm here. It's my life. It's a life choice. I'm here because, like everyone here, I'm passionate about a healthy natural world, the value it brings, and the importance. I think one of the things that I think will be really I'm interested to hear from the other speakers as well, is how we can continue to inspire people using the world's best natural history camera craft skills, whilst simultaneously recognizing there are really significant, important home truths to produce content. And I guess I'm here because all the films that we're making at True to Nature, I take the importance of trying to look for every way possible to embed those important environmental, conservation, sustainability stories, planet placement stories within them, whilst respecting the route to market. And what I mean by that is where those shows are going to sit, whether it's on a digital platform, a linear schedule, or on an SVOD, and how do we balance that? And I think that is one key thing for us all, is to maintain the quality, the factual integrity, the audience engagement, but not shy away from important messages, and how crucially we keep our audience fully engaged to come on the journey. And then importantly, interested to hear about the kind of things that people feel so inspired by the show that they feel motivated to join what we're doing and others to make a positive, tangible difference to the conservation front line, or a healthier world where sustainability, biodiversity, and moving towards obviously net zero carbon. So those are the things why I'm here, because I'm wanting to learn from others as well as share the things that I've learned on my journey as well.
Great. Freddie.
Oh, thanks, Tom. I think I'm here because, to some extent, I mean, the same as Wendy, deep passion, care for the natural world. And I think that there's a gap between what's happening to the natural world and what the general public know is happening to the natural world. I mean, it fills my inbox, and yet I'm surprised every day by some new information about some disaster happening and some new tipping point that we're approaching. And so I think that a lot of the problem is a communication issue, and we in this industry are incredibly privileged to be able to have an impact through our communication. And then the second half of the question of what to see change, I mean, that's a huge question, but ultimately, in simple terms, a greater diversity of content, I think, is where I'd like to see it all go. So not just what are we going to do in the big blue chip landmark space, or what are we going to do in the more seaspiracy space, but really trying to think about how these very, very important issues are put across in content very, very diverse, from sports to entertainment to all kinds of issues, and where can we use our influence there?
I think that's a really important distinction as well, because often we can feel like we're the only people who should be talking about these stories, and that there's a sort of a single magic bullet, holy grail formula for how much conservation content or wonder should be in something. But there's like an ecosystem of programs as well, an ecosystem of outlets to suit all these diverse audiences. And it kind of feels to me like the more diverse the storytelling and the opportunities for different storytellers to tell them, the more audiences will discover coming to that content as well, because it's two-way. It's not just us deciding what should be made. Sharik, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, like so many of us, I've had the absolute privilege to be out filming all these beautiful animals, filming the people that live with these animals and these beautiful landscapes for over a decade. And I think it just sort of happened that you just start to really realize you're in a crisis. And like Freddie says, that there's just a real gap now with what people understand and the reality of where we are. So I feel we have a really strong, such a strong, such a powerful, communication is so powerful. And we have such a responsibility when it comes to that, with the power that we carry. So it's our duty to inform, it's our duty to collaborate and work together to be able to inform more, take on the crisis that we're going to face if we don't take responsibility for this planet.
And if there was like one thing in your role, in your position, that you are looking forward to contributing, that you really want to contribute, what would that be?
So yeah, I really feel that there's a lot of there's already people helping wildlife. There's already people fighting for this planet, and for us to I want to communicate their stories, and I want to bring international attention on what these people are doing. It is so inspirational what's happening out there, and it's such a great way to get people on board with also doing good things. So I want to inspire our audience to actually take those actions and to support the people on the front line that's looking after our wildlife for our children.
And a lot of what people are talking about is very different, I think, than if you'd been asking these questions maybe 10 or 15 years ago, maybe quite different from the roles we perhaps thought we'd have as filmmakers. Tom, how does that feel in the commissioning world?
Yes, I mean, I echo a lot of these sentiments. I'm here because thinking about how we tell stories about the environment is probably our #1 priority across science and natural history programming. I'd say, there are other big areas, big important areas we cover as well. We're doing lots on the pandemic, obviously. We do lots on mental health. Of course, lots of these things are really important, but hopefully as we come out of the end of, or towards the end of the pandemic, the environment is clearly, I think, for us and for our department anyway, the biggest single story. And I'm just, really interested to hear what everyone else on the panel's got to say about it. And, I think, as you sort of alluded to in your question, Tom, our perspective is slightly different. We think a lot about the audience and about, I guess, the back end of program making, whereas a lot of you guys who are producers out on the front line have a different perspective. And I'm, really, really interested to hear that. In terms of where, a sort of ambition or where I, hope we can go, I guess I'm thinking a lot now about, how do we improve things, and, what are the solutions, and completely, while completely wanting to give our audience the unvarnished truth, also is there a ray of hope we can give them? How can we inspire people, I guess, to, how are we going to get out of this as well? And so that's where ultimately I'm really interested in going.
Great. That's it feels like post-pandemic that people are talking about environment a lot as the thing that's most on their mind. I wonder if if it kind of is slightly helpful, having had this pandemic, to draw people's attention to the fragility. Perhaps we were complacent before. Maybe people are worried now about, more engaged with the things that are going to be coming and changing their lives next. Maybe that will help us.
Yeah.
Faith, why did you agree to join this panel? It makes it sound like it's some sort of something horrible, but why did you agree to join this panel? And if you've got something to share, what would you like to contribute to talking about nature and climate issues?
Thanks, Tom. First, I think this panel is great. I agreed to join this panel because I'm so passionate, much like everyone, about the natural world. But I'm also really passionate about the impact of these films that we're creating, not after the films are created, but while the films are being created. Because, and I'll speak about Kenya specifically, because that's where I operate from. You find there are all these amazing stories being told, all these international crews that come to tell these stories. But you find very few of the local filmmakers are actually involved in the process of creation. So there's this gap in these voices, and there are these stories that are not being told. And I think the way forward, and I think probably the pandemic has highlighted this, we need more collaboration. the amount of projects that were cancelled last year because crews couldn't come to Kenya when globally all the borders were locked down, it was tragic. It was so sad to see that people in foreign shores, you know, Bristol, the US or anywhere, felt that they couldn't rely on crews on the ground. But we did have, you know, a few projects that went ahead, and I was fortunate enough to be a part, and I'm still part of a project called Queens, commissioned by National Geographic and being produced by Wild Star Films. They went ahead and they're incredibly intentional about changing the landscape, working with local filmmakers, and I'm hoping there'll be more of that in the future, and more listening of diverse voices, because it's really going to take all of us putting our heads together, because there's no blueprint of how it's going to work, how it's this collaboration looks in the future. It's going to take so many approaches, I'm sure, but I hope to see more of that, and I hope to see the table becoming bigger to include more people that look and sound like me.
Do you think that, because often people have been talking in the UK about having more diverse voices in filmmaking and reducing our carbon footprints, and it feels like a bit of a no-brainer that instead of all the same people flying out from the UK to allow you know, collaborations with filmmakers in other countries would both reduce our footprint and increase the diversity of our voices. Do you feel that the pandemic might be making that more likely?
I think so. And I think if nothing else, it's highlighted the need for it, because if we were to, you know, God forbid, have another pandemic, it would be catastrophic for some companies that are kind of just waiting for this pandemic to be over. It's just showing that things need to change. We need to not just build capacity on the ground in different countries, but also develop capability. You know, people need to grow. And it's one of those things I'm always so careful and keen to say. We're not saying that people shouldn't, you know, we shouldn't have any foreign crew flying to Kenya, because that would be, or any other country, because that would be, it would be the same thing, but backwards. Like, we just need a bit more cross-pollination of skill sets and experiences to enrich the voices and to change the dynamic, and I think that would be such a healthy combination, because we're in desperate need of new stories, and I think this would be one of the ways we can do that.
It's lovely how many terms we're all using that come from the natural world, like cross-pollination, enrichment, diversity. Like, we all know this stuff, you know, from our biological backgrounds, if we've got them, our experiences, our interests. Like, I feel like, you know, it's just like nature. It isn't a zero-sum game. The more diversity, the more opportunity. It's not about just there being like one thing. If one person gets to do it, another doesn't. The more different kinds of people team up, the more things come out of that. So that feels an exciting prospect. Lisa.
Sure, thanks, Tom. I just want to echo what Faith said about making sure that local communities are involved in the making of these amazing films. And one of the most exciting partners that we have on Waterbear is Wildlife Direct in Kenya, and their series Wildlife Warriors has been shot by local production crews, and you can watch it on Waterbear for free if you sign up. So why am I here? Similar reasons to everyone else. I have been very passionate about the natural world since I can remember. I was always that kid in the garden with the little bug catcher magnifying glass thing, and really just have been amazed at all of the wildlife documentaries that I've consumed over the years, especially the ones made by David Attenborough and his team. But I think it was sort of like in the 90s that things really started to shift, and we realized that the natural world wasn't so beautifully perfect and just always going to be there forever on our TV screens and on our doorsteps, if we were lucky enough to have it right on our doorsteps, but that actually it was disappearing. And I remember reading scientific papers when I was studying zoology at university about the extinction crisis, and just being absolutely shocked that not everybody was talking about it. And so now it's, 20 years later, and yes, we've started talking about it. Finally, we're really talking about it, and it has reached the mainstream now. Somebody just put in the chat that Sky News are now doing, a daily or a regular piece on climate change, which is fantastic. So I think, one of the reasons why I think this is like the most important conversation we could possibly be having in the world, because like without the climate, without the environment, we can't deal with anything else. It's like somebody's pulling out the rug from under our feet. Like we can't tackle human rights without preserving our climate. We can't deal with poverty. We can't fix anything. We can't fix politics with it. No, like this is the most important issue of our time. We have to deal with all the other things at the same time as well. But it's like everybody needs to get together. I agree. We all need to start collaborating a lot better than we've done before. So thank God for the internet. Thank God for Zoom. We really need to be like thinking exactly how we can work better together and what are the impact priorities that we all need to focus on. And I think that I come from the NGO world. I've previously worked for Greenpeace and Avaz and other NGOs. And I think that, a lot of very effective NGOs have great, smart experts who know exactly what needs to change and how to change it. They have great strategies. They know how to talk to decision makers. They don't necessarily know how to bring in everybody else. They don't necessarily have capacity to tell great stories. A lot of NGOs now all know about storytelling, but they don't necessarily have the budget for it. They don't have the massive, great production teams like the BBC does. I'll shut up in a minute. But
you have to tell me one thing that you're excited about happening, like that you're going to be part of in the next, I'm going to give you 2 years. What one thing?
Okay. That NGOs, highly effective NGOs, will be working very closely together with big budget filmmaking producers and commissioners to deal with like the most important issues of our time, rather than separately doing it separately.
I mean, that feels to me like even in my work life, like a big change that's happened is that like the definition of broadcaster has expanded, the definition of audience has changed and overlaps, and people are asking for films to be made that from all sorts of different backgrounds, and that's giving many different opportunities. But it's also a bit like bewildering sometimes. Like, Tom, I've got a quick follow-up question from John Aitchison, who asked, oh God, sorry, here we go. Very glad to hear Tom say that the environment is the biggest story for science and natural history commissioning at the BBC. I'd be interested if the whole corporation sees it that way as well, given the extreme urgency of the need for us all to act.
I mean, I would not want to speak for the whole corporation, but it is, I'd say it's probably the biggest, one of the biggest issues. We have a brand, our Planet Now, which kind of aims to bring together content from across the BBC. And actually, when you look at shows that are being commissioned, certainly across factual, so outside of our department, there are loads of amazing programs about climate change. So the recent Greta series on BBC One was actually a documentaries commission. Adi Patan's recent series on BBC Two is a current affairs commission. Panorama make loads of amazing kind of environmental shows. Justin Rowlett and Roger Harabin, do brilliant work, I think. So yes, it is, because it is, the biggest existential issue facing us, right, as everyone said. And actually all the audience data we're seeing suggests that audience appetite is only growing for stories about the environment. And I think that has been a change in the last 3 or 4 years, I'd say.
There's a follow-up question, if I may, Tom, that's come from Fergus at Picture Zero. Thank you, Fergus. Great programming out there on climate and environment, but there are still some audience demographics that are not engaging. He's very interested to hear your thoughts about the main reason that is preventing certain segments of our audience population from engaging on the issue.
I'd be curious to know which audience demographics Fergus is thinking of. I mean, look, whenever we make environmental shows, we still unfortunately get some complaints that complain that climate change science is still unproven. Obviously we operate from a position now that consensus science says climate man-made climate change is a fact. I'm not, you know, most of the audience feedback we get is really positive on our environmental shows. And certainly we have a range of shows that work with different audience demographics. So I'd love to see Fergus's data, but I think everyone, you know, my experience is most viewers are interested and engaged now.
Yeah.
I'd like to ask that onwards sort of to Wendy, because you're in charge of the NHU. And do you think in the time since you were in charge of the NHU, that in itself has shifted? Do you think it's easier now that we have proof of audience interest and engagement to be able to make this kind of content that grapples with these issues that maybe we would have shied away from or thought were hot potatoes before?
For sure, yeah. In the last 5 years, you can just feel the ground shift. And I think what really gives me hope is the younger generation coming up and really having a voice, because clearly they're inheriting the planet, and this thing, you know, this really matters. I was just reflecting back, not dissimilar to Lisa, actually, in the sense of my kind of trigger. I was 13 years old. It was the very first David Attenborough landmark, Life on Earth, and I saw the coral reefs in all their technicolor, and that was triggered it for me. I want to go diving on the Barrier Reef. Spent 3 years doing my PhD there. So I know through my own personal experience, the power of what, you know, any of us having the opportunity to make content can be life-changing in terms of inspiring people to connect. And I saw coral bleaching as well in 1988. One of my first jobs at the NHU in 1991 was a series called Nature Strand, and it was pretty hard-hitting documentaries, and I was the researcher on coral reef, coral grief, because, as you were saying, these stories have been around for a long time. That series was made, or the Nature Strand, and there are other quite hard hitting, but you know, the reality was the approach we took, and obviously I was a researcher at the time, but the star was because people were very passionate and they felt, you know, we really have to tell these stories. There was no holds barred. It was just straight to the audience, and the audiences switched off and it all got decommissioned. And the nervousness, and I totally get it if you're on the other side of the fence, is the nervousness then to kind of commission things, which clearly you want to have the big 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock BBC One slot. You're sandwiched between the best of Line of Duty and, you know, Dancing with, you know, Strictly or something. You want that big, and that's really where Fergus was probably coming from. You want the big kind of the big massive audiences because it's big universal subjects. But as craft filmmakers, we have to, I think, increasingly use all our skills to be sophisticated, to engage in that platform, understand the platform and what it's doing, use those creative skills to make the best content, but also be smart enough and sophisticated enough to get those important messages across. And I think, you know, what I'm definitely, you know, pushing in all of our shows is to really champion that, so we never ever end up where we were back then, that we work collaboratively, collectively to make impactful, high quality films across all platforms, to engage all audiences of all ages. And this is our chance now to get it right, and that's why I'm learning as I go from everybody else, because let's not ever end up where we were, because you know the Earth's not going to wait. You know, we've perhaps lost 20-30 years in terms of our content production, but now we're all totally round the table here, actively engaged. Just one thing I just thought I'd just mention, which slightly back to your other question about what might our new world look like. One project I've just done, which admittedly I couldn't have done at the BBC, and that was one of my motivations to having a bit more creative and commercial independence, is we've just made is a partnership with Botanica by Airwicks, who make air fresheners and what have you. It's a big brand, Reckitt. Partner with WWF. True to Nature made a 1-minute ad that went out literally straight alongside Celebrity Bake Off, so a big massive audience, and it's about the partnership, but significantly the partnership will result in 20 million square feet of wildflower meadows being planted over the coming year, and we've lost 97% of our wildflower meadows since the early 30s. And for me, it's that inspiring content that informs that then engages the audience, who then value it, care about it, then there's actions such as planting wildflowers, working on nature's conservation, from which we then learn. And it's how do we stress test every piece of content around what I see as that human virtuous circle of which we can all become part of. And so that's a small example with quite a big company. But for me, you know, these big these big shows cost a lot of money. So we do have to broker the creative ambitions in terms of tech innovation, story, science, with the funding model. And where is the funding model that will drive future big impact films and content? You know, and I would be looking as much to the multinationals as I would, that obviously you do need to have multinationals that have credibility, otherwise you can fall foul very quickly of your own brand credentials in terms of who you're going to partner with. Whereas obviously if you partner with the BBC and others, then you've got that legacy brand accreditation. But nonetheless, I think it's an interesting thing for us to navigate. And then the only other last thing, and then I'll definitely put my mute on, is to throw into the mix, of which any of you who know me, I've been championing children's natural history films for 10, 15 years now, and we've been making nearly 100 children's films at True to Nature. And that again is such a massive audience. And what is so brilliant about the children's natural history films we can make is that you can just effortlessly blend it in terms of that creative, emotional engagement with the factual reality in an age appropriate way. But all the films like Garden Tales I've made, it's great that we've got lots of digital content. So you've watched the show, you've got inspired. If you want to go out there and kind of do your bit to kind of for the worms to come along, or the wildflowers, then I think that practical application around our content and a link through to charities where it's appropriate as well, or NGOs, I think we as filmmakers need to think of all the things that we can do. A film in isolation is not enough.
Wendy, I've got to move this on a bit, I'm afraid.
That's it.
I totally agree. I wonder if, like, I mean, you've touched on a lot of really interesting points, and it's pulled my brain, and there's been a lot of really like great responses as you've been speaking in the comments. But all of this kind of makes me wonder, like, conservation used to be the C word. It was all about how do we get these issues onto TV. Kids really care about this now. Other people care about this now. We've seen the evidence of that, such that both in like who's tuning in to watch things, they're not turning away now. But also, I mean, Rowan's put in the chat here that climate outreach research found that 61% of Brits say they're extremely or very worried about climate change, with only 6% answering not at all. I'm sure there'll be similar things about the biodiversity crisis. I wonder if we've like crossed the Rubicon and in our heads maybe haven't even noticed it, and are still fighting the battles of the past about how do we not turn our audiences away by talking about, you know, these problems, where we might turn audiences away by not talking about these problems. I certainly find that if I watch a wildlife show, or a show where it shows an animal that you know is in trouble, or shows an ecosystem that is, you know, you're like, oh, that's, why are they not mentioning the other thing that everyone knows about? That's a bit weird. And I wonder if we might be turning off viewers who are already concerned about these things by not creatively engaging with them within our content. I'd like to know what Freddie thinks about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's a risk that we're all aware of now, that if you see a program about a particular area which portrays it in this incredibly pristine manner, the real worry as a filmmaker is that, yes, you're inspiring audiences, yes, you're, you know, they're learning about the natural world, all the beauty, the wonder, but are they coming away going, oh, that looks okay, that looks fine, what's the fuss about? And I think that's a real worry and a real responsibility, and I feel in my, you know, relative, yeah, I mean, I just over the time I've been working, starting in the BBC on Frozen Planet, and then you're seeing the change of going, this maybe isn't entirely responsible. Yet within these big landmarks, what you can't do is, if you have 10 sequences, have all 10 sequences about difficult situations, because you have to have an emotional engagement that draws people into the awe and wonder and beauty of the natural world, but then decide what it is that you want the audience to get from your film. And I think that's where, as filmmakers, the real challenge comes, is what is it? What's your film hoping to achieve? If you're trying to inform and educate, what's the point that you're trying to make? And what's the impact that it's actually going to have? And I think that's the big area of growth in our area, is to measure that impact. And I know we'll come on to that, but also to know as a filmmaker from the start, if you've spoken, if you're making a Blue Planet 2 type series, and you've spoken to fish scientists, and you know that there's, say, an issue with overfishing, and you think, right, what are the scientists saying? They're saying fishing quotas need to come down by this amount. They're saying trawling boats are absolutely disastrous. So what's the key message that you're going to get across? And I think as long as that comes from an emotional standpoint, then the audience is likely to go, great, I've learned about that. And from that, they're going to learn loads more. You can't do everything in your program, but it's about that emotional connection. And I hope that's where we go, and we can really see the impact we're making.
If I may jump in, Tom, we've had some questions that are exactly on that theme, and I'm going to try and group 3 together to see if I can give Bridget, where are you? Steve Smith, hello Steve, and Douglas, who've asked similar questions, really around this balance, this conflict between informing and depressing when it comes to talking about some of the sort of more apocalyptic sides of this story, and also whether or not we've focused enough on that side of the story, and we now need to start talking to our audiences about solutions, what they can actually do. So they've been informed, and how do we convert that into action? I mean, the wildflowers example is obviously a lovely example of that. I don't know who you would like to address that to, Tom. Make that.
I'll open it up. Who would like to address that?
I would love to jump in. This is what I'm talking about non-stop. I'm sorry, I'll be short on this.
Lisa's going to answer also, so I'll give you 4 paragraphs. Okay,
4 paragraphs. First of all, solutions, absolutely. We need to model the future. We need to say, what are the reasons for hope? That's very, very important, especially when talking to children and factoring in eco-anxiety, which I'm aware with my daughters. So the solutions are very important, but if you just focus on hope, then you're assuming that all these environmental issues are well understood. And I don't think that's the case. I think there's a plethora of issues, and we still need to educate and inform. And then lastly, I think that in filmmaking, you've got your tools. If you go and see a great film in the cinema and you cry and you laugh, you come away thinking that was fantastic. And I think that to really feel the hope and really come out of that viewing going, there is hope and these are the solutions. If the audience have come to the bottom where you go, God, that's really, really sad, but look, here's the hope. You're just making engaging content. You're just using the tools as a filmmaker. So I don't think we need to shy away. We have to do it in a delicate way, not gruesome, not gory. I think they're difficult areas, but be honest. But then I agree. I think a lot of what we have to do now is turn it around towards solutions and bring that hope back.
So brilliant, unmuted, brilliant. And Lisa, your 4 paragraphs.
Thanks.
Sorry,
well, firstly,
think in paragraphs. Does anyone do that?
I don't know, maybe. I've got some notes in front of me and they're in whatever. Anyway, firstly, just want to say, totally agree with you, Freddie. And I'm just so thrilled to be part of this really passionate group. I think that we absolutely do need to balance the doom and gloom with the hope and the solutions. We definitely need to start giving people ways they can really take significant action. And I'm not just talking about keep cups and straws and things, but like actually how can you really become an activist? And that doesn't mean to say you've got to get out there with a sign in the street and start yelling and blowing whistles and things. You can if you want to, that would be fantastic. But there's so many different ways that you can be an activist. So I think it's about engaging people in the movement in whatever way that they can take part, and really advising people how they can participate and giving people lots of options and ideas. How you do that at the end of a film is something that is like my job, and Tom, we've been working together on So Hot right now, video versions for Water Bear, and thinking, right, what do we get people to do at the end of this film here, and there's lots of different ways you can do that, and some films will drive people towards taking a very specific kind of action. Write to your MP, sign a petition, calculate your carbon footprint or what have you. But I think some of the most impactful things that we can do as filmmakers, as producers, as commissioners, is think about what is the narrative that we really need to shift in society together in order to really like inspire people to actually search for these kinds of actions to take in the first place. And I would say it's actually films like My Octopus Teacher. Sorry, I know that's a bit biased of me to say that because Water Bear's been sort of born out of the company that made it, Off the Fence. But I do think My Octopus Teacher, even though there's no like, go here, do that, take action at the end of that film, so many people have been inspired to and see themselves differently in relation to nature. It really gets us to see ourselves as part of nature. And that is, you know, what lots of experts are now saying is the kind of mindset shift that we need to achieve in our culture right now, is to really see ourselves as part of nature. And then once we do, we'll want to be more careful about it, if you see what I mean. How many people have you spoken to who have watched My Octopus Teacher now, who have just taken it upon themselves to stop eating octopus or get more involved with ocean conservation or lots of things? You know, it's creating this mindset shift that I think is really important. Same with the climate. You know, there's real hope if we can actually seize it, but it's about telling people, you know, exactly what they can do to bring about urgent climate action at like the systemic level, and we can all get engaged in that.
Brilliant. I think, and what's really neat about those two answers is they're kind of like, My Octopus Teacher does not overtly, I don't think at any stage, say these places need protection, go here, do that, exactly. or even say they're under threat. Yet, because of the love that you experience through this man's love for the octopus, you feel protective. You want to start taking action by yourself, even if you don't know what you want to do. And I feel like sometimes these debates we have about should we have conservation in our programs miss the point. Should we have a connection between the audience and the ecosystem? You don't need to mention conservation to make someone love something enough to protect it.
Exactly.
And you can also make someone so appalled by what's happening to something that they feel like by having so much conservation handled badly, that they feel that they're bad, that they're sort of driving something that they didn't even know about. So I hope that there's a bit more nuance in this conversation, that it's about how we emotionally engage people, not just factually engage people with what's going on. And I think what Freddie said also was really interesting to me, was that to think about what your film is trying to achieve. I think a lot of the time it's so hard to get a commission, and for so long people haven't even thought about what your film is trying to achieve, apart from deliver it on time, on budget, with the behavioral sequences in it. But if you don't think about what your film's going to achieve, then that is a form of, you know, every film goes out and affects how people think, whether you like it or not. You can't get around that. So if you're not conscious in your filmmaking, you're just going to be unconsciously changing what people think, you know, so that's the flip side of thinking about your impact, is if you don't think about your impact, you could have impacts that you don't want. You could make people think the world is pristine. You know, you could make people feel bad and unconnected to nature. So I think those are, you know, but there's opportunity here. So guys, we've been already going for like 51 minutes and I haven't got to question one. These are opener questions. So like, I think what's really interesting is that this has come out of the Filmmakers for Future Wildlife big discussion survey. And none of us have the answers to all these questions, but this is the beginning of a discussion in our community. Like, there are so many other people in our community who have a lot to contribute towards this. We're all learning, we're all listening. We're going to be changing our minds as we go along. So I'm sorry we're running so late, but hopefully we'll have lots more of these and we can all sort of like evolve along the way as we go. That's my apologies for handling this very badly and not even getting to question 2. I'm going to try now. The big discussion, something that Filmmakers for Wildlife hosted at the end of last year, 9,000 people votes, mainly from people in our field, cast on the various questions. And one of them was that 90% of people agreed that natural history programs have a duty to report on the true current state of the natural world, very strong word. 87% agreed it is our responsibility to communicate the need to act with extreme urgency to halt the climate and biodiversity crises. And only 9% of people thought wildlife films were doing enough for conservation and for these issues. So This is our peers. This is people who are doing this for a job, who are on the front lines of making these productions, and these are people who know about these issues. Rather than beating ourselves up about this, what are we going to do? I'd like to ask you, and I want you to answer in one sentence this question, or one thing. What one thing is in the way for you in trying to get these stories across to audiences, or what one thing would help you do it? And it's me. I don't know who's ready because I'm just jumping this. Who's ready to answer this question? Ready?
Faster turnaround, react to issues. I think a lot of what we do is 4-year issues, holding back information that we want to land with a big splash. Get it out sooner if we can.
That's great. Because I guess, do you think that would also mean that we know what the audience is like, and allude to what like Wendy was saying about like testing, like stress testing certain narratives and ways of storytelling?
Yeah, that would be great, but just get reactive mostly. Just get reactive to the issues that are happening right now, and get out there and tell those stories really quickly. I'd love to see more. And that's for Tom to think about commissioning about what can we do that's got a much faster turnaround, so we've got a voice in the debate more than just landing these big landmarks.
Faith, are you ready for this one?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it'll be more than one sentence, but I'd say
you can have like 4 sentences.
Cool. Maybe 2 paragraphs. Involve local filmmakers, and the reason I say this is we need that that capacity and the capability built, because if we're making these films and the end audience are just the English or the Americans, and it's not trickling down to the communities, specifically like in Kenya, and the communities are the ones who are looking after these animals, who are trying to find solutions how they can benefit from their land and conserve. If the message is not trickling down to them, then it's really an exercise in futility. So involve more local filmmakers, so we can grow in our ability to tell stories in a way that's global, and it's reaching the global market, but also the local market, and local and when I say local voices and local communities, I'm kind of differentiating, because sometimes I don't belong to a community that lives next to a wilderness area, but because I'm a Kenyan, I would know how to package a story to the communities that live along those areas in a way that whatever the UK and the US audiences are getting involved in, it's actually, there's momentum and it's reaching the communities, and we're all pulling together in the same direction.
And what would help build that capacity and start fostering those collaborations?
So I don't think there's one particular avenue. I'll speak of a few that I know that are working really well. One of the things is production houses have to be aware that we're not all the same. There's some people who have a little bit of experience. There's some who've been fortunate enough to have a few more opportunities. So we need those who are committed to offering trainings, bringing experienced people on the ground to train, but we need opportunities on crews, on space to be made, on for positions that aren't, driver or cook or housekeeper, things that where our storytelling ability is changing. And also had an amazing conversation yesterday with this amazing lady called Katie Marie, who's got this service, and she didn't tell me to say this, but she matches production houses with people on the ground, with crew on the ground, and we need people who want to fill in that gap, to be the bridge, who know of opportunities and are willing to match, because production houses may not know who's on the ground, so we need people doing that. And again, it's going to take intentionality from people kind of deciding, what are we going to do? Because you can't have, for instance, the BBC doing it all, but maybe the BBC has a capability to set up a satellite NHU office in Nairobi, because already Nairobi is the headquarters for BBC Africa, and just having a small department. So we just need engagement from everyone, trying to figure out where do we where can we fill in the gaps, because we all can't do the same thing.
Tom, I'm just going to butt in here, really just to acknowledge some questions rather than pose them directly, from a number of people who've picked up on this theme of international, not just in terms of the way that we work, but also in the way that audiences receive natural history content. So, you know, Joshua, thank you very much. He is in France, or has lived in France for most of his life, and just these documentaries just don't connect with the French audiences, he's noted. Same for Cornelia, she's joining us from Hong Kong. I can't believe what people all over the globe joining us today. And again, in Asian countries, she's just saying that people just don't emotionally invest in this type of content. And then likewise, Walking Pictures, I think came to an event this morning, if it's the same person. You know, how, asking you, Faith, directly, which I think you've answered now actually, how the big budget wildlife shows play to Kenyan audiences when the people experiencing the climate emergency is actually hitting those communities really, really hard. So is there a conflict there in terms of how we receive that content?
Yes, unfortunately, sometimes we've had crews that come in to do, they have their own agenda because, you know, they have the end audience, and it's understandable. We don't have, or you don't have unlimited budgets. But a way around this, because I know it's something that's on people's minds, like, how do we change this? Because we can't just all of a sudden decide 50% of the crew will be locals, because that's also not practical. But something along the lines of, and I know a number of projects are doing this at the end of any blue chip or whatever series, having, traditionally there's a, you know, behind the scenes segment to show how tough it was to get the shots and whatnot, but maybe having that be the conservation part of it, because and it might mitigate like the depression that people feel when you watch something that shows you how badly something is doing. Because if you highlight conservationists on the ground who are doing stuff, and I think that's been one of the most mind-blowing thing for me, is working on all these projects and seeing, as depressing as it is, because all these species are endangered, there are people on the ground who are working so hard and they just need help. So even if it's a 5-10 minute segment at the end of a program about said species, it would even direct them, like, how do you even research how you can help? It's a indirect call to action. They can research whatever's on the ground, how they can get involved. And this segment can be filmed by a local crew. I mean, instead of using the same crew that's doing the blue chip stuff, use local crew to do this. So you're also in tandem building the skill set, which is great. And also, yeah, building capacity without dedicating all these resources to just to train people for the sake of training them, where they're actively learning and doing stuff.
I think, I mean, it also feels like there's a culture shift. I've spoken to especially younger people who say that when they watch wildlife programs where a bunch of, well, people who look like me, white men, dressed in khaki, turn up in a different country, it feels already slightly awkward to have those people being the people who are telling the story of something that doesn't take place where they live. So hopefully the audience might take us there a bit faster as well. Tom, what would you like? What thing that would change would help you in the thing that's brought us together today, communicating the nature and climate crisis?
Yeah. Well, as a commissioner, I have obviously the one thing that will always help me is really amazing, distinct ideas. You know, that's what I'm always looking for. And I think perhaps it's obvious to say in this sphere, but I think in terms of what we've been talking about, in terms of that increased audience appetite for the environment, you know, I agree, I echo everything everyone said. You know, I'm sure lots of our audience don't understand the problems as much as you guys who are on the front line and don't maybe have that level of detail. But I think there is generally an increased knowledge that things are going wrong. And so now when we're giving them new content, you know, I'm always looking for, well, what is the distinct way into this story? What's going to, you know, in our, you know, it's kind of amazing, but very crowded media landscape we have today, with so many different ways people can consume media. If we want to have an impact, we've got to make programs that really stand out in that field. And, you know, I think just hearing what Faith's talking about in terms of more diverse voices, that is a huge creative opportunity for us all, because, you know, as soon as we're bringing in more diverse voices, we're going to have different perspectives and more distinct ways of telling our programs. And that's really, really exciting. You know, and thinking back as well to the conversation a few minutes ago about my octopus teacher, you know, as you commented, we wouldn't necessarily think of that as a piece of environmental programming, but it's a piece of programming that feels distinct and has stood out this last year. And I think that's the key for all of us. So, you know, we want to keep telling these stories and engaging big audiences with these stories. And so the onus is on us to find really inspiring and surprising ways of doing that.
And a slightly cheeky follow-up question: if people in the audience today have got one of those exciting stories,
please,
how do they get into it? How do they tell you about it?
They email me, tom.coveney@bbc.co.uk. But it may take a while to come back, but you know, please, we want all suppliers to send us their best environmental ideas. Of course.
There you go, guys. Sorry, Tom.
That's all right.
And Lisa, what would you like to see changing that would help you?
I think I'd like to see a change in the way that this whole industry works, especially from people like Tom, who have the power to choose from these amazing ideas that people send to him. I think, you know, a lot of grants for research and films and all kinds of things that could make the world a better place, you know, those decisions are made based on proposals that are sent through. So it's kind of like survival of the fittest in terms of how good are you at presenting your idea, and, you know, how great does it look with bells and whistles and stuff. But I honestly believe that people who are paying for films to be made need to have their own impact strategy. They need to be going out there and asking people for certain ideas that can achieve certain things. And so, you know, I think it's difficult for everybody to have an idea of like, well, what's the most important thing that we need to do in the world? But like, does the BBC have an impact strategy where, you know, how is the BBC, and, you know, I'm just using the BBC as an example here, but like, how is the BBC uniquely placed to actually stop the climate crisis and make the world a better place? Like, rather than just picking from the best ideas that are sent to you, are you really searching for the things that you believe you can then use to have the most impact in the world? That's a question for you, Tom, I guess.
Wait, but can I just, so just trying to get the one thing that you'd like to change is to change the way that films are made.
It's for everyone to take a step back and ask themselves, how can I make the world, what is the most important thing that I could do? Like, what are the urgent problems in the world, and how am I best placed to help solve them? You might not know the answer, but then you need to go and get it from somewhere. And maybe we need to form an alliance where we can all align on these things.
Yes. Well, that doesn't feel like a question just for Tom. That feels more like a reframing of like from...
Yeah, but it was kind of like,
yeah.
Do commissioners actually have impact strategies? Like impact objectives? I don't know. I honestly don't know. I'm quite new to this field, actually, of film industry stuff.
Yeah, I mean, that's a slightly tricky question for the BBC, because obviously our charter forbids us from campaigning. So, you know, our mission is to inform and educate, and that's where our impact is. You know, if it's impact as such, you know, it's so important to our viewers that our journalistic integrity and impartiality is you know, is part of our offer. So, you know, I loved hearing about Wendy, you know, Wendy's Bake Off scheme sounds great, but as she quite rightly pointed out, you couldn't do that on a purely publicly license fee funded broadcaster like the BBC. But it's a brilliant scheme. I applaud it. I think it's amazing. So I just think our objectives and, you know, the different mediums we're working in will always be probably, I guess, slightly different. But our priority is to get those messages out there and to give that information to our viewers and to inform them and inspire them.
And I guess, but there's an element to this which kind of applies to all of us, which is, rather than looking at this as our job, that this is our role, and how can we in our roles change this thing that we're concerned about, rather than us in our job do the thing that people in our job normally do. Is that a cop out? I don't know. That's how I've sort of it's hard enough to get a job, but it's even harder when you've got to make it into a role. But we're kind of stuck with that. We're in this privileged position of having the job, so we kind of got to. Wendy, sorry, I haven't asked you yet.
I'll just back ref on that. Well, interestingly, Sky, you alluded to the climate show now, which is going out twice weekly, and they invested 25% in True to Nature. I was blown away. I hadn't appreciated over the last 15 years how much they've been driving the net zero carbon, the ocean rescue, single plastic free and not using single plastic, rainforest initiatives. So that is a broadcaster that is absolutely spearheading a lot of the things that would unite us in terms of making tangible, practical differences on the ground. And so, yes, they have massively comprehensive sustainability. When you're getting a commission, obviously we're linked to all the Albert projects, but to be fair, all my BBC projects are all Albert accredited as well. And the very first UK TV expedition 10-parter with Steve Backshall, where the editorial is absolutely has a very strong environmental message, and we have the team, and it's really interesting that the subject came up. I've made a really proactive editorial decision. We have a good mix of representation of people, experts from the country in which we're working, right alongside a lot of women in expedition, which is not a typical female environment. And I've had a lot of positive feedback from people saying, haven't made a virtue of it. They've just said, I've watched a show and it just feels contemporary, fresh, new and progressive and inspiring. So I share that in the spirit of, let's collectively be confident about, to your point, Tom, new faces, new stories. That's what we're in the market for. We don't want dull, boring and derivative of what we've done before. We absolutely want the fresh and new. And what you were saying, Faith, earlier, which is, I'm going to answer your question, Tom, what would I like to see going forward? Not to lose some of the brilliant things that we've learned to do as filmmakers during the pandemic. I mean, nobody would wish that ever to happen, but what has been utterly brilliant, Faith, is that, as you were saying, as your experience has been, but we've echoed that in other places as well around the world, we have actively worked now with a lot more local based camera and specialist craft filmmakers that we wouldn't have perhaps done otherwise, and we've had really positive results. And my team have become very accomplished at directing on using digital devices, literally at 2 o'clock in the morning, directing films, maybe in Indonesia or, in the Pacific. And so the filmmakers of the future are developing incredible skill sets that allow us to be more collaborative, work more effectively to get more people into the industry, more faces, and very crucially, the other thing we've done, which is right at the heart of it, is we have done a lot more shoots together to drive sustainability, reduce carbon footprint, and all the other things which kind of tie back into what's at the heart of this, which is a big part is the climate crisis. So my in a very quickly is the things that we've learned. Let's not go back to old practices. Let's keep all the new good things and build confidence around them and do more of them and make it business as usual.
I think what's really interesting is that lots of the things that have come up, and especially what you've just talked about, Wendy, are innovations and changes that we've some of the people in our industry have done as a response to the situation that we're in. And some people are ahead of the curve in trying, like you're talking about, in terms of hiring people in different places or reducing their footprint or trying to maximize their impact. But there isn't really very much reward for that at the moment. And I think it would be really nice. I think the thing I would like, and Tom, sorry, you're the only commissioning person here. So obviously there are a lot of other commissioners in the world, especially from our American friends. It would be great to see this realized, because that would incentivize that.
There is a lot of work going on around that at the moment. So, Wendy's mentioned Albert, and all of our BBC Studios productions are Albert certified now, and we're working towards all indie productions. A lot of indie productions are Albert certified. But I think there's a lot we can do about sharing best practice. And just you've mentioned kind of things we've learned from the pandemic. I have to mention that the team on the watches. They've for years they've been doing amazing work to reduce their carbon footprint and looking at all aspects of production. But in obviously when the pandemic hit and they were filming Springwatch in March, they suddenly had to transform the way they made that show. And actually they've used that to just accelerate what they were doing already. So I think they shaved something like 107 tons off their carbon budget in 2020. And when you look at the data from 2015 to 2020, the carbon footprint of that show now is less than a quarter what it was in 2015. And they've carried that on, not just through Spring Watch, but through Autumn Watch and Winter Watch. And amazingly, Winter Watch just gone, you know, that's a huge show with a big kind of live outside broadcast. It was the first, I believe, a world first of a kind of big live outside broadcast that was fully powered by hydrogen and hybrid batteries.
And
so,
I think that self-awareness is so important. And another top tip, we put in all our budgets offsetting our carbon and challenge the commissioning or the broadcasters to take it out.
That's good. When I'm afraid I've neglected Shariq for like 20 minutes.
That's no bad thing.
And especially because this question is so relevant to her, because Shariq is a natural history producer who basically stopped, like who changed her career, like quite radically, to focus on impact and focus on making her productions have an impact. And so you are at like you're dealing with some of the, as a trailblazer, some of the hardest parts of this is like, how does it get paid? How do I reach an audience? You know, could you talk a little bit about that? And then what's in the way for you? What needs to change for you? What would help you?
Yeah, thank you, Tom. It's yeah, I mean, it's all a learning curve, to be honest. It's step at a time, like all of us. But I think you know, I'm really focusing on highlighting the people on the ground. You know, like Faith has also said, we really need to reach those audiences. And you know, our content, we have so much content as well, and this is what I'd like to change. Actually, we have so much content, a bit of flexibility in being able to use that content not only for our international audiences, but to have a bit of flexibility with that, to craft films that can actually target specific audiences, whether that's local communities, whether that's, you know, even lobbying governments for a certain cause, or, you know, helping the organizations just get their messages out. I think we just sit on this massive amount of content that we have the ability to use in so many creative ways that will have an effect for the people that's making the difference on the ground.
So like not wasting that. Like because when I think about the terabyte, or, you know, whatever the word is for like a billion terabytes, billion petabytes, you know, of all the footage that we go out with this great carbon expense and recover, that's locked into contracts to only be used, but you know, or that can't be shared with NGOs, or can't be shared or reused for education. Part of me thinks of that like those butter mountains or food waste pyramids.
Yeah.
You know, this is a limited resource that could be used for a good cause, that because of our intellectual property laws quite rightly protecting stuff. But is there a way around that? Is there a way that where it's not in competition with the commission, that can be reused, and so we don't waste that? Because we're filming declining ecosystems. That's a resource that is disappearing, and we're some of the only people who have access to it because of our positions. So this is, a lot of things have been brought up by this, and you know, which is quite good, because this has come out of the, you know, the big discussion. The big discussion will continue. What we're going to try and do is harvest all of these, and then to set up the next conversation. But I think there's a lot of resources that people in the audience have mentioned that relate to some of the things that have been brought up, and it would be really good to start building some sort of community where, you know, rather than competing for commissions, like we are sharing our experiences for these particular problems, like sustainability, communications, what works, what doesn't, that kind of thing, so that we can feel like we're grappling with these together. I know that Faith, when she was talking, there were a lot of people posting resources that are being developed now, so that like international collaboration is easier. It'd be really good to share those resources, because there's a lot of goodwill, but it's hard to educate ourselves on the job about the opportunities that are there. Moving forwards, Trisha, oh wait, we've got the meerkat.
Yes, I'm back. I'm not going to pose any more questions because I can see that you're very short of time, but I really just wanted to let all the panelists know that there's been an outpouring of love and comments, as I'm sure you've seen some in the chat, and also there's been absolutely hundreds of questions. Some of them, those of you who've asked questions, I've clicked that they've been answered because I think that the topic has been touched on during your questions. But what we will do at Albert is we'll take those questions and we'll use them to inform our next event, so they won't all be wasted. And thanks very much, everybody, from my perspective. So I'll dip out now, Tom.
Thank you very much, Trisha. And so I think my last question for all the panelists is, what should the next panelists on the next one of these discuss? What question should be asked of them? I'm going to, who could answer that one first? Freddie, could you?
Wow, that's great. Thanks, Tom.
Sorry. Wait, I like the
no.
plants behind you, Freddie. They're really nice. Tell us about the plants behind you.
Yeah, the plants have grown through the pandemic. My house is full of them. I think there's a couple of things I really want to pick up on just briefly. I think the idea of, that Lisa raised around commissioning ideas on what's needed rather than the good idea also lands with the development arms of the production company. So, for example, soil health. Very, very important subject. Is it addressed at the right level to inform and to educate? So is that an issue with commissioning, or is that an issue with production, or both? But actually, as a community, we all need to think, right, there are some difficult topics to take on. Invasive species, you know, cats in Australia, what are they doing? Really difficult topics, but important topics. Overfishing has been one that's been, feels like, avoided for a long time. So these are difficult. So that to make Tom's life easier, we just need to come up with really brilliant ideas with brilliant characters to tell those stories. That's another thing, as well as it would be lovely if commissioning then also goes, no, look, there's a real gap in, and as the BBC or whatever broadcaster platform they are, we really want to inform and to educate, and people need to know more about this. So, okay, we can't find the best idea, but it's still important to go out there. It doesn't, you know. So that's one thing. And the other thing is, I think there is more area to work in sharing footage with academics, in getting films made and made in local languages to get to different, to local people. For example, Media Action is a NGO that works with the BBC, creating content about issues in Bangladesh, which will then be made for a Bangladeshi audience. There are these systems in place. I think they just need to grow. They really need to grow. That hasn't answered your question at all, Tom. What should the next people talk about?
Actually, that was it. Like, how do we do that? How do we make those systems in place? How do we build systems to take, maybe?
Yeah, how do we grow those systems? Ultimately, it's a kind of feeling of corporate responsibility, I guess, because this is such an urgent issue. I mean, you know, in the sense that we take certain issues and we fund ways to change it around. There are lots of issues I could talk on, but it's this idea that I think more and more people are taking on. Look at what Netflix are communicating over going carbon neutral, and they're lining up 7 behavioral changes that they want to see their content bring about. You know, that's quite an interesting impact campaign that they're leading with. So that's a form of corporate responsibility, I think. So I think it is happening. It's just needs to happen fast everywhere.
Maybe that's the carrot, the things you'd like to see happen. And there's also the stick of corporate responsibility, which is that your audiences might not be very happy with you if they feel you haven't told them what is actually going on and informed them. I don't think it's like impossible to see a future where you can see, you know, you've seen on Twitter, people boycotting Twitter when it has not acted appropriately in terms of allowing people to understand what's happening in the world. And I think there might be more audience power in shifting that transition as well towards more responsible storytelling. Just a hunch. Wendy, you're muted, sorry.
I'd be interested to explore more where we think the future funding might come from, in terms of the shifting landscape, because we've all acknowledged I think what's exciting is that there are more platforms than ever before to take content in short form, long form, all, you know, big feature docs, the whole works. I think, but what are the funding models as the platforms and the audiences are shifting and moving, that any one of us as wildlife filmmakers can be kind of tapping into, and like you say, building new creative and commercial partnerships. So that's what, so I think that's one thing, new funding models, and where I think it could be really fascinating in 5 years to see who might be funding the majority of natural history content in the future, given it was historically public service broadcasters. It's already shifted into the big SVODs on a big scale, and as I've alluded to, a lot of internationals that you would never have imagined are now looking to get their green ticket, and they recognise that they don't have the skill set of natural history filmmaking in the purest sense, and how do you bring that together? So I think that's a topic that I'm very engaged with, and interested to hear other people's experiences. I think the other key topic is continuing to look at how we put something back into the natural world. The expedition one I mentioned, we were the first carbon partnership. Money went to support deforestation in Borneo, a passion area for Steve Backshall, to help protect local communities, and obviously it's the home of orangutans. So to measure success, yes, of course it's overnights, yes, it's commercial success, but also what does each project, can it kind of, you know, wash its face in terms of feeling that there's a tangible, meaningful return back into the natural world, that any one of us feels that's the story, and then tell that story, as Sharik has said all along, and we very share that passion, because those stories are amazing, inspiring, and right at the heart of our world, and we haven't on a big enough scale yet brought those stories center stage, and I hope we will see that more so going forward, because I think it's really important.
So both that comment and Freddie's comment, they feel like this is like a systems approach. Like where does the money flow in? How does the content move around? Like, we're talking a lot about editorial decisions here by individuals traditionally, but perhaps we need to have Albert get some finances, some SVODs, some big archive storage facilities, the kind of people who don't normally come into these Lion's Den panels, that and have them talk about this next.
So if you let me have one more. So the big shark with Steve Backshall, big landmark, it's got the blue chip aspirations, but the strap line is most feared, most misunderstood, and most threatened. The invitation for the audience is to go on that journey, for the sharks to be less feared, so put the Jaws things to bed, more understood, because we do need to understand what exactly is going on. At the moment, they're more threatened. Could they be less threatened, with knowledge, with passion, with hopeful things that we collectively can do to make a more positive outcome for sharks? So, you know, that'll come to Sky Nature this autumn, and that, I hope, will be a game changer in terms of having the blue chip credentials. So the quality is there, which people love, and bring them in, but we haven't shied away from the tough stuff. It's right there center stage. It's not just tagged on in a 10-minute at the end. And at the same time, we maintain the audiences throughout, so they feel entertained, inspired, and look for all the ways in which they can connect through to, for some of them to have for that to become a proactive thing they can choose off their own merit to do something. So that's my aspiration, and I'm hoping.
Well, what would be very cool would be when people are doing these unusual things, if they then report back, especially if it doesn't work, so that we don't repeat each other's failures. That I would find really useful. So it's really cool hearing about these things, but obviously we're mainly talking about the ones that we think would work, and definitely the ones, not the ones we've already done that haven't worked. But man, let's share our failures a little bit more, and successes. Faith.
Yes. I'll piggyback off of that. I'd love to see on the next panel companies, production houses such as I suppose Wildstar Films with Queens coming on board to talk about, because they're actively bringing on local filmmakers, and I'm sure they have lots of stories, because I'm not the only international filmmaker that's working on the crew. So having Vanessa, Marco, Chloe come on and just chat about the best practices, including other individuals such as Wendy and other people who are actively trying to change the landscape of the storytellers. I think it would be beneficial for others to hear that, because sometimes it's overwhelming trying to think, you know, the wheel's been turning this way. How do we, because we don't want to change the wheel, but how do we enhance the wheel, that it's more inclusive? Because I think that's a large chunk of the change. People are terrified that we are going to completely change how things have been done. So from that side of things, I think it would be beneficial for people who are looking for ideas. And I think for people like me, I'd love to hear what other projects are on the ground, what other initiatives are working. I would also love to hear a panel, to hear people like Lisa chat more about distribution for filmmakers on the ground who are making stuff. Like, how do we get stuff onto the Water Bears and the Netflixes and the BBC? Is it even possible? Can we have a conversation about how we could partner up with experienced filmmakers so we can get our content seen and commissioned or approved or licensed? I don't know. So I'd love to see more of that.
Auto muted. Sorry, Faith. I think this. I hope that the Albert and Filmmakers for Future are listening, because I think this is going to expand. I also saw that Emma Tyrrell said that she wants braver conversations. Emma, this is terrifying stuff already, but fair enough. Well, I think it's just hard to lure people into conversations that have to be brave when they're public and recorded, I'd say. She says, sorry, just the passion. So Tom, what would you like the next one of these to be talking about?
On a really practical level, I'd love to see a scientist or some scientists on the panel. You know, I think broadcasting can be a bit of a bubble. I mean, you know, I guess especially when you're not on the front line like I am, but you know, so it's great to hear from producers who are on the front line, but also I just think having people who are thinking about all of these same issues but in a slightly different ways can be really interesting and thought-provoking. And then thematically, I mean, I've been scribbling away through this conversation. It's been so brilliant and varied and surprising. And so, you know, what I have loved is although there's been a lot of convergence in terms of what we talked about, I don't know if it's this weird sort of moment of the end of the pandemic where everything's been thrown up in the air, but feels like there are real kind of surprising ways that we're thinking about things or doing things now. And so that's what I'd be keen to kind of carry on or to hear more of, you know, in the next discussion. Just when we were talking about earlier, this kind of change in audience appetite, it's going back a few years now, actually. And in a way, this is when we first started really noticing the changing viewer appetite for environmental programs, was when we made Climate Change to Facts, the David Attenborough film in 2018. And you know, that went out on kind of BBC One prime time. And at the time, it felt like one of those films that traditionally maybe felt difficult or challenging or, you know, full of quite dense climate science journalism. But it happened to land and go out the same weekend that Greta was first in London. I don't know if you remember that time. And, you know, I think Extinction Rebellion were marching. And we were delighted and really surprised by the audience response to that show and the fact that people got on board with it. But then the other kind of moment that really surprised us is we suddenly turned around on Easter weekend and the marchers were projecting the film on the side of Westminster Abbey, which was obviously never in our planning at all. But it feels like this conversation about the environment is permeating so many aspects of our lives now and is coming up in so many surprising ways. That's what I'd love to keep talking about and hearing about from other perspectives.
And Lisa, I know I probably can make a guess at what you'd like, which is the question that I didn't even get around to asking, which is about impact. But I don't know what question would you like to be taken on next time?
Yeah, definitely talking more about what do we mean by impact, how can we achieve it, you know, what kind of people do we need to convince to achieve different kinds of impact. So yeah, I'd love to talk about that, because I think that we can go barking up the wrong tree sometimes, as you were sort of saying before, you know, like you can actually end up achieving things that you really didn't want to. So really getting a good grip on your strategy and your outlining, defining your goals and doing it, and how we can do that first rather than attaching it on as a kind of afterthought.
And finally, Sharik.
I'm with you, Lisa. I think what I'd love to see as well, there's so many amazing impact producers out there, and the world of impact is so vast. I think it's quite shocking sometimes to see what has been achieved by films, and maybe not even in the natural history world, but you know, impact producing and the independent in the independent film world has been going on for decades, and a lot, like so many massive situations has changed because of it. Globally. So I'd love to hear more of the positive stories that came out of impact producing and opening everyone's eyes as to what is possible.
I think there's lots of different definitions of impact, but one that I heard was making people care enough to do something. And I think that, you know, what more could you want from a film than to get somebody to transport someone so much that they cared enough to actually do something.
Yeah.
I was thinking, well, when I was a runner, when I first started out, I was on a train with this old man, and I asked him what he did, and he said he was a feature film director, and he turned out to have been in his 90s, and he directed a film called A Night to Remember in the 50s that won a Golden Globe. And I said, you know, have you got any advice for a runner? And he said that the most satisfying part of his career was not directing feature films. It was during the war, when he was swept into a strange unit of people whose job was to try and train up people in how to do their jobs commanding other soldiers better. And he said that it was nothing that he'd have ever chosen to do. He was caught up in this thing outside of his control, but creatively, it was the most interesting part of his career and the bit that he looked back on the most fondly. And I think, you know, there are parallels to the situation that we're finding ourselves in here. And I wonder if that we might look back on this difficult and confusing and creatively exciting period similarly in the future. And with that profound statement, I'll bring things to an end. Thank you very much, everybody, for your patience. Our panelists have spoken for way longer than probably they were tempted in saying that they'd speak for, and the audience has been amazing, and hopefully we'll pick up on lots of the things you've had to say. So thank you. I mean, you can unmute yourself and you can all wave and say thank you. Is that how we do this? I don't know.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Looking forward to the next one.